I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. At a House Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on Tuesday, Representative Mike Johnson spoke about President Biden's possible use of the National Emergencies Act. The Louisiana Republican warned that the president could potentially declare an emergency on climate change or an emergency on abortions. Listen in here for more.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the insight of our witnesses today, really do. It's really important, and thanks for the history lesson, Mr. McClear. We could listen to you all morning. My questions are for Mr. Canaparo. Congress passed the National Emergencies Act, as we've all discussed, to try to place guardrails around the president's use of emergency authority. So not to crash the bipartisan mood of the hearing here, but I've got to talk about current real-life events, right? So some on the left right now as we speak are calling on President Biden to use this authority to circumvent Congress and to accomplish radical political agendas. So, for example, just last January, 2021, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that President Biden should declare a national emergency to address climate change. Obviously, this is something I believe Congress should be deliberating. President Biden should declare a national emergency on other things. Last few weeks, the White House scrambled to hold meetings to determine how it can declare a national emergency in the wake of the Dobbs case leak regarding keeping abortion on demand in place. So the question is kind of a broad one. Would declaring a national emergency to address climate change, for example, be an abuse of the president's emergency authority? What do you think about it?
So I'll take a slightly unusual tack. It reminds me of, I don't know if you're familiar with the author James Freeman Clarke. He wrote, politicians look to the success of their party, statesmen look to the success of their country. Politicians take a 4-year view and try to achieve whatever they can with whatever power they have in 4 years. Statesmen take a 100-year view. And so the question really is, who should decide? If you find yourself cheering on the president's use of emergency power when you agree with the outcome and decrying it when you don't, you might fall into the politician camp and not the statesman camp. The question is who decides, and the answer that the Constitution provides is Congress. Congress should decide, except when I think it is fair to say you all decide, Congress decides that that there are some situations in which you truly cannot react with the necessary speed. But I'm going to a quote from a law review article by then Professor, now Justice Amy Coney Barrett, that keeping these sorts of decisions in the legislative branch ensures that the decision to suspend or to activate emergency powers emerges from a process that is relatively more representative of the people whose civil liberties are at stake. So when we get into the problem of deciding, of looking at specific emergencies, what we're trying to do is reason from specific examples that we like or don't like into a general framework. But that's not how we're going to solve the problem. It is much better to start from the Constitution's text and logic and reason forward into a general framework that we can all live with, whether we like the outcomes or don't.
I love that response. And Justice Amy Coney Barrett has been a dear friend of mine since high school. And back then in the 80s, we used to talk about concepts like this. We were the two nerds in the room. But there was a lot more statesmanship at the time, right? And not, and maybe less politicians. Quoted, going back to your earlier statement. And this is the quandary, the situation we find ourselves in, right? Not enough people are taking the national perspective and the long view. We're all trying to achieve these immediate gains. And I think it's corrosive to the institutions, and I suspect, well, I know you all agree. Let me ask you, for those of us who have to make some ultimate decisions on this, what would you say is the best source of the original intent? Particularly, we're talking a lot about inherent emergency powers and that kind of thing. What's some of the best source material we can go study from the founders' view? Is it the Federalist Papers? Is it particular sources? What would you say on that? I might ask all of y'all that question.
Sure. Just to keep my answer short, my sort of go-to is often Justice Joseph Story's commentaries on the Constitution of the United States.
Perfect. That's great. I've got that volume. How about Ms. Goitin? Goitin, okay.
Yes.
That was French, sorry.
So I think there are a number of sources in Giancarlo's testimony that are absolutely worth looking at, and I would add, these are a little more recent, but I would add Justice Jackson's opinion in Youngstown, I think is a seminal articulation of the balance of power between the president and Congress, and for looking at sort of the intent of the framers and sort of an originalist understanding, There's a wonderful article by Professor Sai Krishna Prakash at the University of Virginia Law School entitled The Imbecilic Executive. I love that title.
Yes, I wish I'd chosen it myself.
It's not quite as ad hominem as it sounds, and it's a truly wonderful article, and I would recommend it to everyone. And it shows how our understanding of inherent presidential authority has just morphed dramatically in recent times from the original understanding, which was that the Congress did not provide the president with any inherent emergency powers.
And the reason is, I'm out of time, but I'll just conclude by saying this. Obviously, we're going to original intent, talking about the framers' intent. They wanted a full body of the duly elected representatives of the people to make these important decisions, as you indicated, and not just one person. And that was that is inherent in our system, is that we're trying to dilute and separate the powers, and this is maybe the most glaring example we have of the abuses and the usurpation. So appreciate all your insight. It gives us a lot to think about. I yield back.